gavel struck like thunder. "Case dismissed," the judge declared. The courtroom buzzed. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered furiously as Karen Ellsworth, president of the Ridgewood HOA, smiled with victory. She had won. Again. Across the room, Emma Warren stood broken, her children clinging to her hands. Everyone believed her husband Daniel Warren was gone, dead, thrown from the hills by men nobody could name. His land stolen, his house demolished, his name erased from the county records. It was the year 1998. The last 20 acres Daniel had refused to sell, worth nearly $500,000, now belonged to the HOA through forged papers. Ridgewood celebrated Karen as the woman who had taken everything from the man who dared defy her. Karen stood before the press and said, her cold gray eyes flashing, "Justice has been served. The land belongs to the community now." Daniel Warren was stubborn, reckless, and impossible. Ridgewood is better without him. But Karen was wrong. Dead men don't walk back into town, and Daniel Warren wasn't dead. 1 year later, in 1999, Karen walked into a gala dinner. She wore diamonds and confidence, smiling as if she owned the world. But that night, her world cracked. At the entrance of the hall stood a man everyone thought buried under the rocks of the Ridgewood Hills. Daniel Warren, alive. His 6-foot frame stood taller than ever, his deep brown eyes sharper than steel. And beside him walked a young man in a dark suit, an FBI badge gleaming at his belt, the son of the woman who had cared for Daniel during the year he lay hidden in a coma. The room froze. Glasses stopped midair. Karen's face turned pale. Daniel's voice cut through the silence. "You tried to bury me, Karen, but the earth spat me back out, and now I've come for what's mine." The reckoning had begun. The flashback, 1992. But to understand how Daniel Warren reached that night, the story must return to where it began. The year was 1992. Daniel Warren was a landowner in the wide American Midwest. His family had worked those fields for generations, carving a life out of 2,000 acres of golden farmland. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with hands strong from labor and eyes that carried both warmth and unshakable resolve. Daniel had sold most of the land, nearly 1,980 acres, for a fortune. But he kept 20 acres untouched. It was not about money. That land held the barn his father built, the trees his children had climbed, in the fields where he had first walked with Emma, the woman who became his wife. Those 20 acres were the heart of his family. But across the county, the Ridgewood Homeowners Association was rising. What had once been farmland was now neighborhoods, shopping plazas, and gated communities. And leading it all was Karen Ellsworth. Karen was in her 50s then, tall with sharp blonde hair, cut to precision, and eyes gray as winter steel. She dressed in expensive suits and walked with heels that struck pavement like hammers. People described her as powerful, ambitious, unstoppable. She was a queen, and Ridgewood was her kingdom. And Karen wanted the last 20 acres. She came to Daniel's farm one bright summer afternoon. Her car, a black Lincoln, rolled up the dirt path, followed by 2 board members with clipboards. Daniel stood at the barn, wiping sweat from his brow, when Karen stepped out, her heels clicking against the gravel. "Daniel," she said smoothly, her smile thin, "you've done well here, but it's time to let progress happen. We're offering you $400,000 for the last 20 acres. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not selling, Karen." "450, she pressed. "Think of your children, their future." "Their future is right here," Daniel said firmly. "This land is not for sale, not for any price." Karen's smile faltered for the first time. Her gray eyes hardened. She leaned closer. "Everyone has a price. Don't be foolish." Daniel turned his back and walked into the barn. "Not me." Behind him, Karen's voice rang cold. "Then you've made a mistake you'll regret." The first signs. In 1993, the pressure began. Daniel started receiving notices in the mail. Warnings from the Ridgewood HOA claiming he had violated imaginary community rules. Fines of $500, then $1,000. By 1994, strangers appeared at night. One morning, Daniel found a letter nailed to his barn door in black ink. "Sell or regret." Emma grew worried. Daniel, she whispered one evening as thunder rolled across the horizon. She won't stop. She'll ruin us. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. Let her try. I won't let her take this from us. But deep down, he felt the storm building. By 1995, Karen doubled her offer. $500,000, she said during a meeting, her smile tight. It's more than this land is worth. Daniel's eyes blazed. You don't understand, Karen. This land is worth more than money. It's blood, memory, and legacy. And you'll never own it. For the first time, Karen's smile turned into open anger. Then you'll have nothing. The war for 20 acres had begun. The year was 1996. Daniel Warren still held his 20 acres of land, but life was no longer peaceful. The Ridgewood HOA had turned its full force against him. Letters arrived weekly, fines for imaginary violations, unapproved barn structure, illegal fence height, failure to maintain landscape. None of it applied to Daniel. His land was outside HOA jurisdiction, but they didn't care. Soon the fines piled into tens of thousands of dollars. Neighbors whispered. Some were too afraid to talk to Daniel. Others accused him of being selfish, for holding land the HOA wanted. And then came the rumors. The intruder one evening, Emma returned home from town pale and shaken. Daniel, she whispered, they're saying things, ugly things. What kind of things? Daniel asked, frowning. That you've been seen with another woman, that you're hiding someone in the barn. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's a lie. You know that. But the poison was planted. Weeks later, Emma saw a strange young woman near the edge of their property. Dark hair, bright lipstick, waving as if she knew Daniel. Emma's heart broke. She didn't wait for answers. By winter of 1996, Emma had packed her bags and taken the children to her father's home in another county. Daniel stood on the porch, watching the car drive away into the snowy night, his breath hanging in the cold air. Alone for the first time in 20 years. The trap. By mid-1997, Karen Ellsworth had raised her offer. $600,000, she said with a thin smile across a polished conference table. Daniel shook his head. I told you, I'm not selling. Karen leaned forward, her gray eyes sharp. Do you know what stubborn men end up with, Daniel? Nothing. Not even their family. Daniel stood, his voice hard. Keep your money, Karen. You'll never get my land. Karen's smile vanished. Then you'll regret this. That summer, Daniel traveled out of town to visit an old friend. When he returned, the county sheriff was waiting. Mr. Warren, the sheriff said, holding a paper, you've been fined $75,000 for violations of community code. Daniel's eyes blazed. That code doesn't apply to me. My land isn't under the HOA. The sheriff shrugged. Court says otherwise. Pay or you'll lose everything. Daniel, desperate to protect his land, paid. $75,000. Gone. But it wasn't enough for Karen. The kidnapping. Late one October night in 1997, Daniel drove home from town. The road was empty, the sky heavy with stars. Then headlights appeared in his mirror. A black van. It sped up, pulled beside him, and forced him off the road. 4 men jumped out, masks over their faces. Daniel fought, his tall frame throwing punches, his boots kicking against the dirt. But the men were too many. They beat him, tied his hands, and shoved him into the van. Hours later, Daniel was dragged to the edge of the Ridgewood Hills. The wind howled, carrying the smell of pine. The leader of the gang whispered in his ear, "You should have sold, Warren. Karen doesn't like stubborn men." Then they pushed him. Daniel's body tumbled into the darkness, rocks tearing his skin, his screams swallowed by the night. The men watched until his figure disappeared, then turned away, convinced he was dead. The aftermath, 1998. By spring of 1998, the Ridgewood HOA announced that Daniel Warren was deceased. Fake papers appeared, a forged sale transferring his last 20 acres to the HOA for $500,000. His house was bulldozed, his name struck from county land records. In court, Emma Warren fought with trembling hands, tears in her eyes. "My husband would never sell. He promised this land to our children." But the judge holding the forged deed shook his head. "Mrs. Warren, the papers are clear. Case dismissed. Karen Ellsworth left the courtroom smiling. To her, the war was won. The community celebrated. The HOA had taken everything. No one questioned why Daniel Warren's body was never found. The year was 1998. The Ridgewood HOA celebrated. The community clapped Karen Ellsworth on the back as she smiled for the cameras. She was the queen of Ridgewood now, the woman who had taken every last acre from Daniel Warren. But while the town toasted her victory, far below the Ridgewood Hills, a broken man clung to life. The survival. Daniel Warren's body had been torn by rocks, his ribs cracked, his face bloodied. The gangsters thought he was gone, but Daniel's heart was still beating, faint but steady, like a drum refusing to fall silent. For 2 days he lay unconscious in the ravine, rain soaking his clothes, insects crawling across his skin. On the third morning, a woman walking with her dogs found him. Her name was Margaret Hayes. Margaret was in her 40s, strong, with auburn hair tied back and green eyes that held warmth. She was a nurse by profession, but more than that, she was a survivor herself, a widow raising her only son. When she found Daniel, barely alive, she gasped, "Oh my God!" With trembling hands, she called her son, the hidden house. Her son, Michael Hayes, was 27, tall, sharp, with close-cut black hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a dark suit, a badge on his belt. Michael was an agent with the FBI, stationed nearby on corruption cases. Between them, Margaret and Michael carried Daniel back to their farmhouse. For weeks, he drifted between life and death. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, head trauma. The doctors would have called it hopeless. But Margaret refused. She cleaned his wounds daily, whispered encouragement into his ear. "You're not dying here, Daniel. Not in my house." Daniel slipped into a coma. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Outside, the seasons shifted. Summer faded into autumn, autumn into the white bite of winter. While Ridgewood believed Daniel was dead, his body fought quietly in Margaret's spare room, the scent of antiseptic and wood smoke filling the air. The awakening. By early 1999, something changed. One morning, Margaret entered the room and found Daniel's fingers twitching. His eyes fluttered open. Brown, sharp, confused. "You're safe," Margaret whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "You've been gone a long time." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Where am I?" Michael stepped forward, his suit crisp, his FBI badge glinting in the dim light. "You're in good hands," Michael said. "But we need to know, who did this to you?" Daniel's memories came back in pieces. The black van, the fists, the cliff, Karen's cold smile. "They tried to kill me," Daniel rasped. "Karen Ellsworth, the Ridgewood HOA. They wanted my land." Michael's eyes narrowed. Karen Ellsworth. He had heard the name before. Whispers of fraud, intimidation, and payoffs. From that day forward, Michael began to dig. The investigation. While Daniel healed slowly, Michael Hayes used his FBI access to look into the Ridgewood HOA. What he found was a nest of corruption. Fake sale papers filed in late 1998, transferring Daniel's last 20 acres to the HOA for $500,000. False testimonies given in court, all signed by Karen's inner circle. Rumors of hired men paid in cash, the same kind of men who had thrown Daniel into the hills. Michael returned one evening with a file thick with documents. He set it on the table beside Daniel's bed. "You were right," Michael said, his voice calm but burning. "They erased you on paper, but paper can be torn apart." Daniel clenched his fists, his strength slowly returning. His face was harder now, sharper. He was no longer the farmer who only wanted peace. He was a man who had lost everything and had been given a second chance. The memory. As his body grew stronger, Daniel's mind hardened with purpose. At night, he would sit in silence, staring through Margaret's window at the hills where they had tried to bury him. Emma's face haunted him, the look of betrayal when she left, the tears in her eyes in court when she lost. His children's voices echoed in his memory. Daniel whispered to himself in the darkness, "They think they buried me, but I will rise, and when I do, Ridgewood will know the truth."
The year was late 1999. Almost 2 years had passed since the world believed Daniel Warren was dead. The return. It was a crisp October morning when Daniel finally drove back into Ridgewood. He wore a dark coat, a scar visible on his left cheek, a reminder of the fall that should have killed him. His once gentle eyes now carried a hard fire. At the town square, whispers spread like wildfire. "That's him, Daniel Warren, but he's dead." "No, he's alive." Karen Ellsworth, standing with her board members, froze when she saw him. For the first time in her career, the iron-fisted HOA president lost her composure. Daniel said nothing. He simply walked past, his boots echoing on the pavement, his gaze locked on her. The family. That evening, Daniel went to the house where Emma and the children were living. The small home looked tired, as if sorrow itself had worn it down. Emma opened the door. For a heartbeat, she could not breathe. Her hands trembled, her face pale. "Daniel." "But they told me you were gone." The children rushed forward, tears streaming down their faces. "Daddy." Daniel's voice broke as he pulled them into his arms. "I never left you. I fought to come back." Emma wept against his chest. "I'm so sorry I doubted you." "I believed them." He placed a hand on her cheek. "None of that matters now. What matters is that they will never hurt us again." The court battle. By December 1999, the case reopened. The courtroom was packed. On one side sat Daniel, Emma, and Michael Hayes, the FBI agent who had become Daniel's ally. On the other sat Karen Ellsworth, her lawyers dressed in $1,000 suits, their briefcases filled with forged deeds and doctored evidence. Karen smiled coldly, whispering to her lawyer. He came back to lose twice, but Daniel was no longer alone. Michael Hayes stood, presenting evidence gathered in secret FBI operations. Audio recordings of Karen paying gangsters for Daniel's disappearance. Bank transfers showing $500,000 moved into offshore accounts. Testimonies from arrested gang members, all confessing to working under Karen's orders. The jury gasped. Karen's smile cracked for the first time. The confrontation. During the trial, Daniel was called to the stand. He stood tall, his voice steady. "They tried to erase me," he said. "They faked my death. They stole my land. They tore my family apart. But you cannot kill the truth. And today, the truth stands here." Karen slammed her hand on the table, her voice sharp. "Lies." "He sold that land willingly. He was greedy." "Enough." The judge barked. Michael Hayes rose calmly. "Your Honor, if I may." He played the final tape. Karen's voice filled the room, cold, ruthless. "Throw him from the ridge. Make it look like an accident. Once he's gone, the land is ours." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Emma covered her mouth in shock. Daniel's children clutched his arm. Justice. The verdict was swift. Guilty. Karen Ellsworth was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. As she was led away in handcuffs, her eyes burned with hatred. "This isn't over, Warren," she hissed. But the gavel struck, silencing her forever. The victory. In 2000, Ridgewood was no longer under Karen's shadow. The court restored Daniel's remaining 20 acres, valuing them now at over $1.2 million due to new development offers. But Daniel did not sell. Standing on his land, overlooking the hills where he was once left to die, he told Emma and the children, "This land is not about money. It's about legacy. It's about us. And no one will take it again." Emma slipped her hand into his. "We have our life back. And this time, no HOA can touch it." Michael Hayes, watching from a distance, smiled. His mother Margaret stood beside him, proud. The woman who had saved Daniel's life wiped a tear from her eye. "You've got your family back," she said softly. "That's worth more than all